Hello again, and God be with you. Some of you will be watching this, I think, will be in school, but the majority of you will perhaps still be at home. But wherever you are, I hope you and your families are still well. You may remember that the story I told you before half term was called The Boys Who Like to Say No, and it involved four boys. Can you remember their names? One was a fairly common name, but the other was others were a little more different. They were called Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Today's story is again taken from that book of Daniel in the Old Testament, and it involves some of those boys again. It's sometimes very hard to do what's right, isn't it? If your mum says you're not allowed to go out, but your friends perhaps persuade you to go, you're certain to get a telling off, aren't you? In today's story, those young boys we met last week have grown into men, and they are still sticking to what they know is right. And they end up in deep trouble. That doesn't sound very fair, does it? But don't worry, God hasn't deserted them. Let's open the book at the story called The Men Who Like to Say No. One day, King Nebuchadnezzar's herald announced, "All wise men and governors must go to the plain of Dura. The king has a surprise for you." When the wise men got there, they found the biggest statue they had ever seen, and at its feet was the biggest band they had ever seen. At the sound of the trumpet, the horn, the bagpipe, and the harp, you must all bow down and worship this golden statue, the herald shouted. Anyone who disobeys will be thrown into a flaming, fiery furnace. The band began to play, and everyone worshipped the statue. Well, almost everyone. For there were three men who did not bow down and worship: Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. All grown up now, the men who like to say no. When King Nebuchadnezzar saw them, he was very angry. "Who dares defy my order?" he growled. "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego," some men said, men who didn't like foreigners from Jerusalem having such important jobs. "Bring them to me at once," growled Nebuchadnezzar. So the men who liked to say no were dragged before the king. "You heard my order," growled Nebuchadnezzar, "and you did not obey. Will you worship the statue now?" "No," said Shadrach, "we will not worship your Shadrach. Our God has told us that this would be wrong." "No," said Meshach, "and we will not forget our God, or the land he gave us, the land from which we were taken." "No," said Abednego, "and our God will not forget us." "Then off to the furnace," growled the king. "Make it 7 times hotter than it's been before, and tie them up so they cannot escape." So the men who liked to say no were thrown into the furnace. Its flames were so hot that the men who threw them in were burned up in an instant. But things were different for the three friends. They weren't burning. They weren't sweating. And they weren't alone. There beside them stood an angel, flickering like the furnace flames. He touched a finger to the ropes that bound them, and they burned right through. But there wasn't even a blister on the skin of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. "God is with you," the angel whispered. "You have nothing to fear." Now, Nebuchadnezzar's lips were no longer twisted in an angry snarl. No, they hung open and limp with amazement. "We threw 3 men into the furnace," he said. "But look, there are 4 men in there now." The herald crept closer and said, "It must be an angel sent by the God these men refuse to forget. If so, he is a very powerful God, for they are unharmed." Nebuchadnezzar leapt to his feet and ordered Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to come out. Everyone gathered round them to have a closer look. And then the king said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the one God. They did not forget him, and he did not forget them. I therefore command that no one shall say anything bad about this God. And what is more, I shall give Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego even more important jobs in my kingdom." Then he looked at the 3 friends. "Surely," he grinned, "you can say yes to that." The 3 friends looked at each other. Then together they looked at the king. "No problem," they answered. What brave men they were! They were ready to die rather than give in to what they knew was wrong. Even today, in many parts of the world, there are people suffering because they have choices to do what they believe is right, and it gets them into trouble. We say these people are being persecuted. Think about how brave and strong these people must be. Now, I'm going to say a prayer, and if you want to make it your prayer, say Amen at the end. Dear God, please help all those people in the world who are persecuted for their beliefs. Help us to respect people who stand up for what they believe in. Amen. Well, that's this week's story. Next week's story is also in the Old Testament, but it involves some different people. So I hope you keep well, and I look forward to talking to you again next week. God bless you.